Thank you everyone again for coming to the 2006 or 2010 6th Annual Hometown Show here in Cynthiana, Kentucky. First up, we have a 1938 RC case owned by Fraser Daly Jr., driven by Allen. You'll go around that, Mary Jane. Next up, you have a 1945 homemade tractor owned by Fraser Daly, driven by. Next up, we have a 1955 John Deere 40, driven by Mary Jane Daly from Keller, Texas. Next up, we have a 1957 Farmall 350, driven by Mary Pope here from Cynthiana. Here we have Brandon Welty on a 1952 Case VAC from Cynthiana, Kentucky. Next up, we have a 1946 Massey Harris, owned by Junior Daly, driven by Kevin Daly. Next, we have Tom Florence on a 1953 WD-45 Owls Chandlers. The featured tractor of the show this year is the Owls Chandlers. Thank you, Tom.
Come on, Davey.
Next up, we have Deb Florence on a 1946 Farmall B. Next up, we have a 1952 8N Ford. Take a look at this. Support a Cure tractor, driven by Sarah Stewart, Worthville, Kentucky. Thank you for bringing that to us today. Next up, we have a 1967 D15 Owls Chandlers, driven by Johnny Stewart from Worthville, Kentucky. Thank you, Johnny. Appreciate it. Next up, we have Al Murray from Brooksville, Kentucky, on a 1959 Cub with a trailer. Thank you for bringing that to us today. Next up, we have a Massey Harris Pony, driven by David Miller. If you see that, it looks familiar. He's been making the homemade ice cream with that tractor. Billy Doyle on a 1971 International 565 and his companion on the fender. Every time you see him out on that tractor, his dog's with him. Thank you, Billy. Now we have Charlie Cochran from Milton, Kentucky, on a 1949 John Deere A, followed up by a wagon. Next, we have Richard Daly on a 1953 SC Case with a 1940 Case hay press. Next up, we have a 1949 Case Model D, driven by Isaac Daly here from Cynthiana, Kentucky.
Oh, come on. Move.
That was a 1939 Model B John Deere. Next up we have Noel Phillips on a 1956 WD-45. Thank you, Noel. Next up we have Jeff Fryman on a 1954 Super H Farmall from Paris, Kentucky. Thank you, Jeff, for bringing that in to us. Coming up, we have a 1935 John Deere B, driven by Danny Booth from Carlisle, Kentucky.
Hello? Yeah. Hey, I can't talk to you now. I'm in a bunch of stuff
Next
here
up,
right
we
now.
have a 1948 Alice Chandler Model G, owned by Johnny and Kathy Boston from Harrow, West Virginia. Thanks for bringing that in for us to see. Thank you. Next, we have a 1948 Alice Chandler's WD Speed Patrol, owned again by Johnny and Kathy Boston from Harrow, West Virginia. That's a unique piece of equipment there, and we appreciate you bringing that to the show for us to see. Coming up, we have a 1948 Cockshutt 30, driven by Bob Wyatt from Keller, Texas. Thank you, Bob, for showing that tractor this weekend. Next, we have a 1949 Oliver Cleatrack, owned by Zach Fryman. Driven by Zach's wife. Thanks for bringing that out this weekend.
Come on, Grady. Come on. Give me some gas. Come on.
Next up, we have a Case 210 garden tractor, owned by Kevin Daly, driven by Draven. Thank you for bringing that out. After the Case, we have a 1937 John Deere Mini. Take a good look at that. Owned by Braxton Fryman. We appreciate you bringing that in. Thank you, Braxton. Next up, we have a 1945 John Deere Crawler, owned by Michael Davis. Thanks for bringing that in, Michael. Next up, we have a 1960s Gravely, registered to Fraser Daly, age 5. I think he's riding in the wagon behind it, driven by Richard.